According to Wikipedia, Fannie Lou Hamer was an American voting and women's rights activist, community organizer, and a leader in the civil rights movement. Born October 6, 1917, Montgomery County, MS. Died March 14, 1977, age 59 years, Taborian Hospital, Mount Bayou. Parents: Ella Townsend, James Lee Townsend. Spouse: Perry Hamer, M. 1944-1977. Organizations founded: Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, Freedom Farm Cooperative, National Women's Political Caucus. Hall of Fame induction, 1993. Descendants: Virgie Ree, Dorothy Jean. As you come on to the page, kindly hit the like bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as yet. And don't forget to put on the notification bell so you can be notified when I drop the next video. Thank you. She first joined her family in the cotton fields at the age of 6. Although she managed to complete several years of school, by adolescence she was picking hundreds of pounds of cotton a day. In the early 1940s she married Perry Hamer, known as Pap, and worked alongside him at W.D. Marlowe's plantation near Ruleville, in Sunflower County. Hamer's ability to read and write earned her the job of timekeeper, a less physically demanding and more prestigious job within the sharecropping system. Fannie Lou Hamer was born in 1917, the 20th child of Luella and James Lee Townsend, sharecroppers east of the Mississippi Delta. The Hamers adopted 2 daughters, girls whose own families were unable to care for them. They later adopted their 2 grandchildren after the older daughter's death. Hamer's own pregnancies had all failed, and she was sterilized without her knowledge or consent in 1961. She was given a hysterectomy while in the hospital for minor surgery, a procedure so common it was known as a Mississippi appendectomy. In the North Sunflower County Hospital, I would say about 6 out of the 10 Negro women that go to the hospital are sterilized with the tubes tied, she told a Washington, D.C. audience 3 years later. The forced sterilization was one of the moments that set Hamer on the path to the forefront of the Mississippi civil rights movement, but the incident that brought her into a leadership role came a year later. On August 31, 1962, not long after attending a voting rights meeting organized by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee (SNCC), Hamer joined 17 of her neighbors on a bus to Indianola, the county seat. Officials blocked most of the group from even attempting to register. Hamer and one man were the only ones allowed to fill out the application and take the literacy test, which both failed. On the drive back to Ruleville, the bus was stopped and the driver arrested. The bus was too yellow, the police claimed. While the passengers were held on the bus, the deeply religious Hamer began to sing spirituals. Singing, in particular, "This Little Light of Mine," and "Go Tell It on the Mountain," became one of the defining features of her activism. When the passengers scraped together enough money to cover the driver's fine, the bus was allowed to return to Ruleville. When Hamer got home, she found that plantation owner W.D. Marlowe was already aware that she had tried to register to vote. He demanded that she withdraw her application. She refused, with an explanation that would become a familiar refrain in her civil rights speeches: "I didn't go down there to register for you. I went down to register for myself."
And we've been down so long, we ain't got no other way to go but up. I'll begin from the first beginning, August the 31st in 1962, that I traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse to try to register to become a first-class citizen. I was met by my children when I returned from the courthouse, and my girl and my husband's cousin told me that this man that we had worked for was raising a lot of cane. And about that time, the man walked up, Mr. Marlowe, and he said, "Is Fannie Lou back yet?" So my husband said, "She is." I walked out of the house at this time. He said, "Fannie Lou said, you've been to the courthouse to try to register, and we are not ready for this in Mississippi." I said, "Well, I didn't register for you. I tried to register for myself." He said, "We are not going to have this in Mississippi, and you will have to go down and withdraw." And he said, "I'm looking for your answer, yay or nay." So I just looked. And he said, "I'll give you to in the morning." And said, "If you don't go down and withdraw, you will have to leave. And if you do go down and withdraw, it's only how I feel. You still might have to go." So I left that same night.
Marlowe ordered her off his land. Hamer stayed with friends in Ruleville for a few days, but it was clear that there would be reprisals against the people who had gone to Indianola. Pap drove Hamer and their daughters to Tallahatchie County, where they stayed with rural relatives for some time before returning to Sunflower County, ready to take up the fight. Her singing on the bus and her willingness to challenge the county registrar had been noticed by local organizers, and SNCC Field Secretary Bob Moses saw her as a potential leader. He sent Charles McLaurin, a young activist, to find Hamer and bring her to a SNCC conference at Fisk University in Nashville in the fall of 1962. The conference was a success, and Hamer left Nashville eager to take on her new role as a community organizer. Pap Hamer had stayed at the Marlowe plantation, working through the harvest to pay off the family's sharecropping debt, but in the fall of 1962 he rejoined his wife and daughters. Marlowe took possession of the Hamer's car, as well as the contents of the house they had rented from him, so they started over in Ruleville. The family's main source of income was Hamer's $10 weekly stipend from SNCC. Through 1962 and 1963, Hamer continued to work for desegregation and voter registration. She would also become involved in relief work, distributing donated food and clothes to the poorest Delta residents. Hamer had spent her entire life in poverty, and she understood that the fight for economic security was a crucial component of the civil rights movement. At the same time, she was willing to use the donations as leverage, and sometimes refused to hand over food until the recipients agreed to register to vote. On June 9, 1963, Hamer and several fellow activists were returning from a citizenship training program in Charleston, South Carolina, when their bus stopped in Winona, Mississippi. In an act of protest, several members of the group sat at the bus station's whites-only lunch counter. Before long, the police removed them from the cafe, arresting 6 people.
I had been to a voter registration workshop, they were just training and teaching us how to register, to pass the literacy test. And it was giving us enough training that we could tell other people, how to pass the literacy test. We finished the workshop, and then we got the Continental Trailway bus to come back to Mississippi. And we got to Winona, Mississippi, I would say about 10:30 that Sunday morning. And 4 people got off of the bus, to use the restaurant to get food. And 2 people got off, used the washroom while I was still on the bus. When I looked through the glass, I saw the people rush out. And I stepped off to see what had happened. And Miss Ponder told me that it was a state highway patrolman and a chief of police on the inside, and began to tap them on the shoulders with billy clubs and ordered them to get out. And I said, well, this is Mississippi. I saw them when they began to put the 5 people, what was, off the bus, began to put them in the highway patrolman's car. And she said, get back on the bus, Miss Hamer. And then I heard somebody scream from the car that she was in and said, get that one there. And then a white man stepped out of a car and told me I was under arrest. And when he opened the door and I went to get in the car, he kicked me.
In jail, several of the activists were beaten by the police and by other African American inmates, whom the police forced to use blackjack weapons. The damage done to Hamer's eyes, legs, and kidneys would affect her for the rest of her life.
And they carried me on down to the county jail. Then when I walked in with the 2 white men that had carried me down, and they cursed me all the way down, they would ask me questions, and when I would try to answer, they would tell me to hush. And I was put in a cell with Miss Yvesta Simpson. And after I was put in this cell, I could just hear some horrible screams.
When the activists did not check in with the SNCC office that afternoon, organizers knew they were in trouble. It took several days, and the arrest and beating of Lawrence Guillot, another SNCC worker, before they were finally released on June 12th.
And I would hear somebody when they say, can't you say yes, sir, nigger? Can't you say yes, sir? And they would call her names that I wouldn't want to go on tape. And she said, yes, I can say yes, sir. So I said. And she said, I don't know you well enough. And I would hear when she would hit the floor again. And finally she began to pray. And she asked God to have mercy on these people because they didn't know what they was doing. And after a while, they passed my cell door with this young woman, Miss Annelle Ponder. And one of her eyes looked like blood. and her hair was standing up on her head, and her clothes had been torn. And then 3 white men came to my cell, and one of them was a state highway patrolman, and he asked me where I was from, and I told him I was from Roosevelt, and I guess he called Roosevelt, and they didn't like me in Roosevelt because I worked with voter registration there. And when he came back, he said, "You damn right." They said, "You're from Roosevelt, all right, and we gonna make you wish you was dead."
After they left the jail, Hamer and her colleagues learned that Medgar Evers had been assassinated on the front steps of his Jackson, Mississippi home the previous day. As the NAACP field secretary, Evers had been the driving force behind the admission of the first black student to the University of Mississippi. In the following months, Hamer increased her public profile, both through her SNCC work and as one of the founders of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party (MFDP), which challenged the dominant force in Mississippi politics, the pro-segregation Democratic Party. In early 1964, Hamer ran for Congress as the MFDP candidate. She challenged veteran Congressman Jamie Whitten in the Democratic primary. Though Whitten won with an overwhelming majority, Hamer's run set a precedent by challenging the established Mississippi congressional delegation, and set the stage for the MFDP to have a national presence. The work of MFDP was one part of the 1964 Mississippi Summer Project, or Freedom Summer, which brought hundreds of college students to the state to work for civil rights. Although some SNCC organizers were wary of bringing in a group of outsiders, mostly whites from the North, though Whitten won with an overwhelming majority, Hamer's run set a precedent by challenging the established Mississippi congressional delegation, and set the stage for the MFDP to have a national presence. The work of MFDP was one part of the 1964 Mississippi Summer Project, or Freedom Summer, which brought hundreds of college students to the state to work for civil rights. Although some SNCC organizers were wary of bringing in a group of outsiders, mostly whites from the North, Hamer saw value in an integrated movement and convinced many to abandon their objections. "If we're trying to break down this barrier of segregation, we can't segregate ourselves," she said in a SNCC meeting. Hamer traveled to Oxford, Ohio, to train the volunteers who would be teaching classes and registering voters, and to sing the spirituals and movement songs she was known for. Tracy Sugarman, who spent the summer in Mississippi as both a volunteer and a journalist, accompanied Hamer as she visited Delta churches to encourage parishioners to register to vote. Mrs. Hamer rose majestically to her feet, he wrote. Her magnificent voice rolled through the chapel as she enlisted the biblical ranks of martyrs and heroes to summon these folk to the freedom banner. Her mounting, rolling battery of quotations and allusions from the Old and New Testaments stunned the audience with its thunder. While the student volunteers knocked on doors and taught classes, Hamer was busy with the MFDP. The party held its own conventions at the precinct, county, and state levels to select a group to send to Atlantic City in August, where they would challenge the seating of the all-white Mississippi delegates at the Democratic National Convention. Hamer was elected vice chair of the integrated delegation, which consisted of 64 black members and 4 white members. The MFDP's goal was to persuade the convention's credentials committee to seat them as Mississippi representatives. President Lyndon Johnson, who needed Southern Democrats' support in his bid for re-election, was determined to block them. Hamer was among those who testified before the credentials committee. During her powerful testimony, Johnson called a last-minute press conference, causing the networks to break with their convention coverage and broadcast from the White House instead.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, it was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen.
The president, Lyndon Johnson, he's not afraid of Martin Luther King's testimony. He's afraid of Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony. And so he decides that the country should not see her testify live.
Johnson is in the White House, and he convened an impromptu press conference.
We'll return to this scene in Atlantic City, but now we switch to the White House and NBC's Robert Goralski.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
On this day, 9 months ago,
He did it knowing that they would break away, thinking he might announce who his choice of vice president was going to be. Instead, he gets up there and he announces, get this, he announces that it's 9 months to the day since Governor Connolly, who was there, was shot along with President Kennedy. So he announced a 9-month anniversary. Everybody's scratching their heads.
Thank you very much.
And then he leaves. By that time, Fannie Lou Hamer's testimony was over. However, it backfired on Johnson because it became a story that she had been taken off television and in the news that night, and for days afterwards, they replayed her testimony.
I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to play something fair.
She had Mississippi in her bones. Martin Luther King or the SNCC field secretaries, they couldn't do what Fannie Lou Hamer did. They couldn't be a sharecropper and express what it meant, right? And that's what Fannie Lou Hamer did.
And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was State Highway Patrol. He said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead."
But Johnson's ploy to keep Hamer off television did not work. Her testimony was compelling enough for many evening news programs to broadcast it, incidentally granting it a much larger audience. Hamer held the committee's attention as she spoke from memory about her eviction from the Marlowe plantation and her brutal beating in the Winona jail.
I question America. Is this America? The land of the free and the home of the brave.
After less than 10 minutes she concluded, "If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives be threatened daily because we want to live as decent human beings in America?" Nonetheless, under pressure from Johnson and Hubert Humphrey, members of the Credentials Committee dropped their support for the MFDP. As a conciliatory gesture, Democratic officials offered 2 at-large seats to MFDP representatives. Though Humphrey made it clear Johnson would not stand for one of the seats going to Hamer, the president has said he will not let that illiterate woman speak on the floor of the Democratic convention. The MFDP rejected the offer, and Hamer's voice was one of the loudest in opposition. "We didn't come all this way for no 2 seats, she said. After the MFDP delegation returned to Mississippi, Hamer was in high demand as a speaker. Her appearances were good for fundraising, always a concern for civil rights organizations, and she spent the remainder of the 1960s balancing national activism with her work within Mississippi.
We have been black, powerless people for 400 years.
Voting rights remained a priority, even after the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, and Hamer took the lead in lawsuits that led to the first elections in which large numbers of black residents of Sunflower County were registered and eligible to vote in 1967. She also organized plaintiffs for a school desegregation lawsuit, instituted livestock and agricultural co-ops to improve economic prospects in the Delta, and was involved in the introduction of Head Start programs for low-income children of all races.
This country was built on the black backs of black people across this country, and if we don't have it, you ain't gonna have it either, because we gonna tear it up. All of the burning and bombing that was done to us in the houses, nobody never said too much about that, and nothing was done. But let something be burned, by a black man, and then, my God, you see, the flag is drenched with our blood, because you see, so many of our ancestors was killed because we have never accepted slavery. We had to live on it, but we've never wanted it. So we know that this flag is drenched with our blood. So what the young people are saying now, give us a chance to be young men, respected as a man, as we know this country was built on the black backs of black people across this country. And if we don't have it, you ain't gonna have it either, because we gonna tear it up.
Hamer had mixed success, particularly as her worsening health, A combination of a lifetime in poverty, her 1963 beating, and a 1976 cancer diagnosis limited her capacity for public speaking and made fundraising difficult.
Being one of 20 children, a very poor family, sharecroppers in the state of Mississippi, I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to be without clothes. I know what it's like to be without food, to live in a 3-room house with no washroom facilities, just a 3-room shack. So in my earliest childhood, I remember one day I was playing beside this road and the landowner drove up and he asked me, could I pick cotton? And I told him I didn't know. I didn't know. At 6 years old, I just didn't know. So he told me, I want you to go out in the field, Fannie, and I want you to pick 30 pounds of cotton. And if you pick 30 pounds of cotton in a week, I'll carry you to my commissary store and I'll let you get some of the things that you want to eat. So don't you like Cracker Jack? That was exciting because I'd never had them. I went out in the field and I told my parents, and my mother asked me, did I want to try? And I told her I did. And she told me, said, now, we won't let you cheat. If you pick it, we'll say you picked it. But if you don't pick it, you don't get it. So this made me work very hard. But that week I did pick 30 pounds of cotton. That Saturday, the landowner did keep his promise. He carried me to this commissary store. He gave me some Cracker Jacks and cheese and the daddy wide leg sardines. But I didn't realize what he was doing other than that, because the next week I was tasked 60 pounds of cotton. By the time I was 13 years old, I was picking 200 and 300 pounds of cotton.
Hamer died in 1977 from complications associated with heart disease and cancer. Hundreds of local residents turned out for her funeral, as did most of the leaders of the civil rights movement. Stokely Carmichael of SNCC, Ella Baker of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dorothy Height of the National Council of Negro Women, and Delta Democrat Times editor Harding Carter all spoke in celebration of Hamer's contributions to her family, her community, and the fight for civil rights that was her driving passion.
As you leave the page, don't forget to hit the like bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as yet. Thank you for watching.